The PCs came to office at a really, I guess every time there's a new government, you could say there's something unprecedented about that time, but you guys came back to power at a really difficult time for a lot of people, not just a few people, a lot of people struggling in the province. Life is hard for a lot of people, and the numbers don't lie. And I don't have all these memorized, so I'm gonna read a few statistics here. More than 1 in 10 children in Newfoundland and Labrador live in poverty. Unemployment's somewhere around 11%. For the first time, according to Food First NL, more than 30% of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians were experiencing food security in 2024. Record numbers of people are experiencing housing insecurity or homelessness. Our only public university is crumbling, like physically and metaphorically. The healthcare system is in crisis, and the list goes on. And the province's debt is approaching $20 billion, and that's just for over 500,000 people. My first question for you, Minister Pardy, is, who in the right mind would want to be finance minister right now?
Well, you captured a lot of statistics that we were aware of before we became government. Mm-hmm. There weren't many surprises as such. I would think that if you look at our platform document represented a lot of the concerns that you've just issued, the data that we had. So we knew we had to bring in some affordability measures. On our housing, we had to adjust. We have the children that would be in poverty. We think that we had, in our first year, a platform that we can deliver to Newfoundlanders and Labradorians because, again, we knew what the need would be. It doesn't negate us knowing where we lie as far as the financial picture of the province. But we know that we had to bring out these affordability measures to Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. And I think we've done a good job of that. Contrary to what some might say on percentages, but we have achieved close to 80% of what platform items that we had there. And I think we are bringing relief to Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. It doesn't negate the fact that we know that we've got more to do. But the most pressing thing, in addition to the affordability, is our financial position, and that's one that we have to address. I've said in the House a couple of times that Tiff Macklem, I remember I went to my first finance ministers meeting in Ottawa, and the Bank of Canada governor was doing a dinner address. Now, how cool is that? So we sat in there, and the title of his address was, "We do not have an affordability crisis, we have a productivity crisis." And if you think of it, he was sensitive to the needs that we need to address the affordability out there. But he thought that we ought to be more productive as a nation. I would think that the federal government now, I think, is working in tandem with provinces to know that whatever we can do to increase our productivity, because if we increase our productivity, the return is that we're able to better serve, the residents of our individual provinces. We're big on that as well. And one thing that we have, even though you said we have a small population, we are blessed with a lot of resources. And we think that if they're developed correctly, properly, responsibly, then we think that we can make sure that we turn the corner to be able to help Newfoundlanders and Labradorians more, but not radically increase our expenditures.
Newfoundland and Labrador, one unique characteristic of our province is that we are so spread out.
Yes.
Small population, but we still have to deliver healthcare and other public services to people in every nook and cranny of the island and Labrador as well. Yeah. And it comes at a cost. You just look at the healthcare costs and how much that accounts for expenditures in every budget. But the idea or the refrain that we need to responsibly develop our resources, we've heard that time and time again ever since the cod moratorium, ever since the fisheries was no longer the number one big industry in our province. You said in your budget speech, same as Premier Wakeham has said before, that Newfoundland and Labrador is back in the oil and gas business. So there is a massive push to get Bay du Nord across the finish line. White Rose extension's coming online soon. And the province is trying to attract more and more investment in offshore fossil fuel exploration and production. You're forecasting $2 billion in royalties from offshore revenues in 2026, and that's almost 20% of our revenues. So we have a dependence on this stuff, and it's also at a time economists and experts around the world are saying there's not only a danger of further exploiting fossil fuels, but also a major economic risk because the price of oil is so volatile, and there's also a rapid transition to renewable sources of energy happening right around the world. So we can't really predict what's going to happen in 10 years, 15, 20 years from now. So in light of all that, I'm curious how we reconcile our dependence on oil and the gamble that these further investments that we're looking for represent, and how we're going to meet our climate targets. So there's the climate side of things, but there's also the fiscal and economic side of things. It's a big gamble, and we're kind of being warned for years now.
Yep.
So how do you talk about that in a way that is like also planning for the future? Because people who are saying it's time to wind down the oil and gas industry are also saying like we should have been years ago starting to train thousands of workers in renewable energy and to be able to transfer those skills and stuff.
I don't disagree with anything you had stated. I know that if you're investing money into the stock market or whatever, then they often say you diversify. Make sure you got a diversified portfolio. If anybody, a government or a family, is dependent on one source of income and you've got one strand, there's always a vulnerability. We know how vulnerable the oil and gas industry is. All you need to do is look at the data over the years. We really can't depend on that. But one thing that the current conflict of which we have in the world, it really shown us how still dependent the world is on oil and gas. It has clearly taught us that. We've got to transition, and I think Newfoundland, Labrador, Canada has to transition to a greener economy. It's going to take time. It can't happen overnight. So when I say responsibly, we have to be responsible. We have to make sure that we create energy projects that are outside of the oil and gas that we've got, i.e. wind, i.e. hydroelectricity, to expand on that. And that's our diversification, what we have as individuals. So we need to make sure that we've got a plan that matches that. But our entire belief has been that we can't dismiss the oil and gas because somebody is going to have to supply it for the transition. Our contention was, why not us, in order to provide it for the transition? People need to hold us accountable to say, well, explain your transition, your plan in order to become greener in your initiative, to build that capacity in our society and our culture to make sure that we're moving along while we've got the oil and gas resource and the demand is still high. That is work that we need to make sure that we do. We feel confident on the resource sector base, which we talked a little while ago, that we'll have wind development in our province in, I think, in short course. While we were hyped on hydrogen, and then it sort of went away, that we thought that may not be in the foreseeable future, I can probably envision that in very short course, that we're going to have a development in Newfoundland and Labrador where hydrogen would be. So these are things that are happening on the green transition that we would have. So if we can do both at the same time, and a member of the opposition would say if you can walk and chew gum at the same time, tap your head and rub your belly and all those things, but whatever cliche you use, we've got to make sure we build that green strand while we've got the resources with the oil and gas.
Right.
Because there is still a large demand for oil and gas products.
Yeah, the thing is, it's been like almost 20 years, I think, that people in the province have been, and I use that time frame because I can remember being a student at MUN and hearing the environment minister at the time, Charlene Johnson, talking about, we can't turn off the taps on oil and gas. We need to, so, that was probably around 2007, 2008.
Yep.
So the thing is, it's been 20 years and there's no coherent plan to become not dependent on oil and gas anymore. So at what point do we stop hearing we can't just turn off the taps? But there actually is a coherent plan. The Federation of Labor, I'll just say, because that was another question I was going to bring up, but I'll say it now. They noted, in the response to the budget, that the plan for a just transition so that workers can be ready to move into other industries, that nothing has really been brought forward from the Liberal government or from the PC government now. And they were really hoping to see that. And that's a really big piece of that plan going forward to transition. So what do you say to that? Yeah,
I would say that we are dedicated to making sure we've got a plan going forward for that transition. And I would think that will be in our term that we'll have initiatives that we are progressing towards the green economy within, building that capacity. I mentioned the wind, I mentioned the hydrogen. That all fits in that narrative that we're talking about. The hydroelectricity development in Labrador, further development, fits within that narrative as well. And that's why it's important that, and the Premier stated that we will develop Gull Island and the Upper Churchill further. That's part of that. We'll do it, and while it didn't come out in the first budget, but I would think that in in the subsequent budgets, we ought to see movement towards that people can tangibly see that's a good initiative. That's a good initiative that, you know, you can check off that box to know that is indicative that we got that strand considered and given attention to it. I know that I went door to door on some of the by-elections that we had, and I found that we were a party sometimes that weren't perceived to be a green party, one with the development, because we talk so much about the oil and gas. And we have. So usually if somebody had an electric vehicle plugged in and we went and knock on that door, then usually they were challenging us on a lack of policy and a lack of direction. We've got to make sure that we do give them the hope that while we're in government, this is front and center, then we're going to make initiatives to make sure that we pursue. Remember now, we've been in 7 months. We know the debt we have, but we're all aware of where we've got to go. And we need to be prepared for the transition and should be on our way.
On a related matter, I've heard some of the opposition criticizing your government for a lack of climate action plan. Now I know that your government has said there's going to be a new climate action plan coming forward. There's one that was recently released, 2025 to 2030, I think, by the Liberals. I did ask the Department of Environment and Climate Change last year when the Liberals were in power, and then recently again, for sort of the calculations or what the formula was to ensure that Newfoundland and Labrador can still meet its climate targets while expanding offshore oil. And they weren't able to provide anything. I filed an access to information request for the information, thinking maybe they just don't want to give it to me, but it came back zero, zilch. So when you're talking about, you know, these massive investments in offshore oil and trying to bring in offshore gas industry as well, and as finance minister, you know, that's a big part of any budget. How do we reconcile that difference, making those investments and trying to increase production of fossil fuels, and we don't even know that we can meet our climate targets? So what does that say about how much we prioritize climate change?
The only thing I can say to you is that we are prioritizing the climate, but the oil industry provides us funds for operational money to provide social programs, to pursue initiatives that we've got that cost money. I'm not aware of too many initiatives in government that we've got that don't cost a whole lot of funds. The oil and the industry is going to provide that. They do that. Premier Wakeham has said that we're going to have a track towards a just transition to make sure that we move Newfoundland and Labrador along to a greener pathway. That is our pursuit. We need to frame that out. We know that through the regulations sometimes has to make sure that we've got a federal government that would have similar regulations. I'm not sure if we can go something not in sync with federal regulations or federal programming. And I can't speak to the current federal program because I know that we want to produce and become more productive. But I know that from meetings that I've had, the green initiatives that we've had, that there's ones that we will consider as a province that we've had conversations on that would have piqued my attention and curiosity without getting into much detail on that. But there are conversations going on because, again, that would be a priority for us moving forward. And I know the old term, which you often hear in my district, would be the proof in the pudding. Well, I know we've got to produce that, and that's a plan. My response to the member for St. John's East, Kitty Vitty, when she had asked, was, we're going to have a plan. And I said, that's a good thing for you to bring up in the estimates when it comes up with our environmental minister, you know, Minister Tibbs. And again, I missed the climate. I sat in on most of it, but then I had to leave at the last part where the climate change was coming up. So I'm not sure what the discussion was. But I know that part of his mandate internally is that we've got to make sure that we've got that plan. And at least the residents of Newfoundland and Labrador won't be wondering what it is anymore, that here it is.
So you're saying it is a priority for this government to work towards a just transition.
Yes.
A lot of people are really, you know, passionate about that, care deeply about that. So, you know, we'll keep an eye out for that going forward, certainly. I invited readers to share some questions that they would like me to ask us. I put out some social media videos. Good. You know, I'm on the TikTok. I'm with it, right?
Good for you.
Or whatever the kids say these days. And a few people from Labrador had a good question, and it's something that I've wondered myself, and having spent a bit of time in Labrador, I've heard this sentiment before. I think I can safely say that there is a shared feeling in Labrador with such a small population, 26,000 roughly, that the mainland portion of the province disproportionately puts a lot into the provincial coffers through mining industry, hydroelectric development, obviously, Churchill Falls, Muskrat Falls. in the fisheries, and they feel that they don't see a proportionate amount of money being invested back in Labrador, because all the problems we look at in St. John's and across the island, you can almost multiply those problems when it comes to poverty, housing insecurity, food insecurity, and these kinds of things. So I think there is a feeling in Labrador, and a few decades ago that really rose up, and there was a bit of a separatist movement in Labrador to separate from the province. Do we actually crunch those numbers, how much Labrador puts into the provincial coffers, and can we compare that to how much gets reinvested back in Labrador?
Yeah, I'd like to be able to give you some numbers for that, but I would say that the reader that you were asking the question on, and that sentiment, I can understand that and can relate to it. Does it generate a lot for the province of Newfoundland and Labrador? Without a doubt. I don't think we need numbers to all realize that they are huge contributors to the coffers of Newfoundland and Labrador. I can understand that they would feel that they may not be getting the attention they would get in the resources that they require. I can understand that too. I know we have 3 out of 4 MHAs from Labrador that are in my caucus with me. So I know that Labrador is front and center. And even if we didn't have them, it'd still be front and center as it should be. But you said we have a massive amount of geography. You could take the maritime provinces and you fit them all into our geography 3 times. That's how massive, that we've got. So there are complications to making sure that what we do, because the land is so big. Minister Parrott said we've got to electrify. We've got to make sure they've got electricity. They're rich in those resources, but they're starved for power. That's restricting. On development would be in Lab West. Very restricting. Maybe we ought to be doing more. Our health minister will often talk about the plight in coastal Labrador, Hopedale, Nain, and trying to get the medical assistance and trying to get out to St. John's and the problems associated with it. It's because of our geography.
And just trying to get basic essentials like food and toilet paper to the coastal communities. And so I think that's an illustration of why people feel that they're getting a raw deal in Labrador, because a lot of people in the coastal communities work in Voisey's Bay, for instance. A lot of people in central Labrador and from everywhere else worked on Muskrat Falls. And so they're seeing that things are being taken from the land and from the waters, but they struggle every year to even get the grocery store shelves stocked in coastal communities. So what can you say to people from Labrador? It was actually more than one person that asked that question, which is why I chose that question, because I do think it's something a lot of people in Labrador want to know and they want to hear addressed from some of our political leaders. So what do you say to the people of Labrador who are feeling that way? Like, what is coming for them in terms of some relief for the basic,
But number one, I think Minister Evans have stated lots of times that healthcare was a big priority. She also talked about the freight boat and getting supplies on a timely basis and when needed, the exorbitant prices that they would pay. So one is that she is the health minister. And I know that maybe if you're listening to the House of Assembly, there's a lot on Labrador in relation to improving the healthcare and access to healthcare. She's going to do and make inroads on healthcare. I have all the confidence in Minister Evans that she will make inroads on healthcare for Labrador. I would say those in rural Newfoundland and in urban will not be forgotten either. So that's one thing. If we electrify, sometimes someone say, well, we can increase housing in Lab West, to help out the residents, because the housing, there's no long-term care. That's in the works. The only thing being is that we really need to electrify in order for it to grow and to put into the resources that the people deserve.
Can you explain what you mean when you say electrify? Because a lot of people there would say, well, we built Muskrat Falls and it's...
Well, they were saying that if we had a large building going in Lab West into planning, the most impediment would be is that you're not going to have enough power on the grid to be able to supply power for a new construction. We wish to build an affordable complex, apartment complex there, long-term care units. But we know that the electrical one, it is tough to have enough electricity even to build those elements there. So there is a shortage of power for access in Lab West that we need to make sure we electrify. And that's the gist of that. Now, to get into the intricate details of how much and what the shortage would be and how much we can do, is that we're close to being at the point where we cannot build further in Lab West because the power is not there to be able to do so to any large scale. Remedy in that will provide more development for Lab West to provide some resources that they would say they need. A lot of people have come out of Lab West for long-term care, away from home. right?
So is all this going to be contingent on developing Gull Island? Is
No.
that no?
No, Minister Parrott would be the best one to ask on that,
Okay.
but I know that you've shared many times that we will electrify and we'll get power to, and he has said in the House of Assembly before that we don't need that new development for it to happen.
Yeah.
You know, we got industry that want more power that would be there, new industries looking to produce in Labrador, but they need the electrification in order to do so. So I'm not sure now, and on the cost efficiency of it, then like I said, I know that Minister Evans often talked about getting product in there on a timely basis with a frequency that people can depend on. And she was critical of the boat that would, when they made the change from Lewisport, she thought that really degraded the service for her coastal communities that she serve.
Earlier this week, The Independent actually published an analysis piece from respected housing advocate Hope Jameson. For a province in the midst of a housing crisis, there's very little in the way of meaningful housing investments in this budget. Your government has promised to build 10,000 new homes in 5 years. The budget allocates a little over $31 million over 3 years to construct new public housing units. But Hope Jameson points out that with an estimated construction cost of around $350,000 per door, that money could amount to fewer than 90 new units, while the housing wait list for 2025 last year sat at around 2,600 households. There's more than 500 people on any given day in St. John's experiencing homelessness or on the streets. People are literally dying in the streets. The CMHC has said that the province needs around 60,000 new housing units by 2030 to meet demand. How are you going to meet that demand? These numbers are huge.
It's a challenge. There's no doubt about that. And I think if it wasn't a challenge, it would be resolved before we came into power. It's not something that's in Newfoundland, Labrador. It's something that, as you know, it's across the country. If it's across the country, we know that we're going to have a federal partner in housing and development that we need to plan together. To do it without federal money is going to be a problem, without a valued partner. And I think we've got a partner in the federal government. Conversations I've been in finance that we've talked housing. I'm sure the Minister of Social Supports and Wellbeing, Minister Wall, with his counterpart in Ottawa, is probably all exclusively talking housing. I would trust that the department will do it. We need affordable housing and more of them. We will develop more housing units only with the help, primarily with the help to reach our goal with the federal government. And Minister Wall is confident that we will have them as a partner going forward in order to create the housing. I went to a seniors conference a short time ago where they talked about connections for seniors. Mohammed was the one that headed that conference, what he had. But one thing in the conference I realized is that we have a lot of these organizations, and Hope wasn't there at that time, but I know that there were a lot of organizations that were there that are deeply engaged in affordable housing. It was refreshing to know that they've been doing it for a lot of years and knowing there's a lot of work to do. But the concepts that they were suggesting and the micro units and the things that we could do that could be game changers, raise the roof was one. It was very enlightening.
Yeah, but the thing is, people say it comes down to what the investments, and the budget is where we look for all that. And so what Hope Jameson was saying is that $31 million for new housing units doesn't do really anything to move the needle. So what do you, is that a fair analysis, do you think?
Oh no, I have a lot of respect for Hope Jameson, no doubt about that. All I'm saying is that probably the funding doesn't match with what we've predicted and what we want to roll out. The only thing I would say is that we've got to utilize those agencies that know from the ground as to where the best utilization of resources would be. We need to let them lead the way.
So
as to what we develop.
But are you doing that? Because it doesn't.
I think we're doing that. Will we do more of that? I think we certainly will. We'd like the cooperative housing that would be created that we can have affordable housing. We've got a project in my district now that's going up 10 units in Bonavista, 10 units in Catalina, the 40 units in Pleasantville that we're going up. There are a couple of hundred that would be in Carnival that may. Labrador West, I know, is on the docket. Is it all going to happen in 1 year that we can put in? I don't know if financially we can roll it out all in 1 year. All I know is that housing is a priority. It's a great need we got. The shelter system, I think we know that where we are with that, with the capacity that we currently have, almost at capacity.
Some say that a part of the housing crisis, there's a lot of vacant units that are secondary or third homes for people, or ones that aren't rented out. You had 2 properties in St. John's that you sold off last year. I was just talking to the Commissioner for Legislative Standards, Ann Chafe. I can see you smiling there. She told me, because the disclosures that you own 7 other properties in Georges Brook, Milton, and Catalina. And so when people see that there are several landlords as cabinet ministers, including the finance minister, why should the people of the province believe that this government is going to move the needle on the housing crisis when the status quo benefits people who own multiple properties like yourself? And we have weak rent controls. We're not up to par with the rest of the country. People can raise rent here. People can evict people easily. Can you explain that for people who are, because we published an article on this last year naming all the MHAs who are landlords, and you were one of them. And I think you owned more property than any other sitting MHA. So can you address that? Because people are skeptical.
That's a good question to end on. You may have been a little leading in what you're, what I would assume. Yes, I have rental properties. A couple of things I can tell you. One is that there is no rent increase. Any tenant that you would have that might have moved in 10 years in any property I've had, there was no rent increase within the 10 years that I've had the properties. So if I have seniors in the property and properties that I have, there are no rent increases, and that's probably a reason why they don't move out. The only time if somebody moved out, there'd be a market adjustment to know that I'll go with what the market adjustment would be only when the tenants move out. That's not a very good business plan if you look at as far as the revenue, but I would think that if you spoke to any tenants that would be in the units that I would have, then they would say that they're quite pleased where they are and the rent is quite affordable.
Okay.
I would think that the seniors and the people that would be in the rental are pleased to be where they are. And I would think that the rental would be below market. And I know it's not all like that. I realize that. But I mean, that's from my perspective that I would pass on, and I know that you need to take my word for that. I mean, if we didn't have people that were going to create houses for people, where would we be in a system? What it is what we talked about before is a diversification. We've got to have people that are going to invest in having properties that would be affordable for people to live in. If this market was void of people that were going to invest their own money into properties in order to rent to people around that market, the rental market, I think we'd be in a tough spot.
Well, the counter argument is that the availability of housing is a big part of what drives up. So if you have people or families who own multiple properties, that also drives up the real estate market because availability is so minuscule, right?
Well, it is, but the markets are going to be the markets. So if you went down into rural Newfoundland, the big part is not the availability. A lot of it is the Airbnb. Others would go up to secondary homes. That puts pressure in tourism areas. So it's not from people coming in, but they're buying up personal properties and secondary homes, which is good for the economy. The taxes are being paid on the property, but it does create a real pressure on the, within the markets. Bonavista, Trinity would be in that category. Big corporations to come in and buy units that all of a sudden are market driven by shareholders. I can understand that if Jim Dinn would stand up in the House and say he's got concern about these big corporations that would come in and, and buy up properties, because then it's just 100% market and profit driven. That I can see would be a concern, which he would have.
If anybody puts a bill forward in the House of Assembly that proposes rent controls, that might affect you as a landlord. Will you support them, those proposals? And I'm talking about just the ones that exist in almost every other province.
I'm not sure if they exist in every other province. Now, I take your word for it. If you've done investigate, I'm not sure about that, but the jurisdictional scan would be. I know that I heard one of the largest provinces said that wasn't going to happen in his province. Rent controls in a free market. What he was talking. There are ways to go about it. We as a province put out the rent supplement that we help out people that their income would be low into a rental market.
I'm talking about things like no-fault evictions, right? When 2 years ago when the Tent City encampment was down there, I slept down in that encampment for 2 nights. Got to know people, did interviews. I met a young mother who had a baby in a custody case, and the judge told her that if she could find stable housing and keep it for 6 months, that she could get her baby back. She moved into a place. 3 months later, her landlord jacked up the rent beyond what she could afford. She ended up in the streets and lost custody of her child. I talked to the former Liberal housing minister about that. There was a lot of pressure on the Liberal government at the time. Most provinces have things that would protect people like that woman from being just put out on the streets because she can't afford what the landlord is asking. And it was because there was such a high demand and people were paying more. So we don't have protection against things like that in this province.
I would like to be engaged in conversations that would prevent that. Yes, I would.
Okay.
I certainly would. And often, from real life examples that we have, that usually informs us when we create legislation to make sure we serve the people well. And I can understand that. When it comes on the affordability, MHA DIN would say that we're looking at a basic income. Lots of times is basically the underline is that they don't have enough as far as the finances coming in to live.
Are we going to try that? I'm sorry, but you brought it up, but that was actually a question I wasn't going to get to. Universal basic income. People want to know about that.
It costs money. I think all three of us that were on that all-party committee would realize that we can't do it without the federal government. And I made have answered that in the House of Assembly at one point in time, where number one was to, as far as a lobby to federal government, to have a pilot project or for our initiative to join us.
Yeah.
Well, PEI asked them only a couple of years back for the same thing, and they didn't. So I'm not optimistic that the federal government would join us with that. But
so the province can't do that on its own?
Financially, we wouldn't be able to do that, no.
Even if it's there's a good chance that it might work, because it has been proven to work in other jurisdictions.
Yeah, it is. But I know that when we look at a single mother with a child and so on, that we did that, and we're about 3,000 more children in now with the child benefit. That's going to put more money into single parents with children. So there are other measures that we can do, and I can understand the basic income where it is. Would it be a consideration now into poverty reduction? These are the things that I think we're going to look at in the poverty reduction plan that we want to lead the country in, much the same as we did a decade and a half ago where we were. So I know that we're working on strategies in order to make sure that we can lift people out of poverty. If everyone had enough basic income to be able to function, a lot of the things I think would look after itself.
Exactly. Basic needs, right? A roof over your head,
100%.
A universal basic income. Well, if you give me the name of the person at the federal government who I can reach out to and talk about and try to convince them to work with the province on something like that, I'll be happy to hold them to account.
Prime Minister Pardy. Start with him.
He might be tough to get some time with, but listen, I respect any politician who is willing to sit down and take tough questions. So thank you for your time. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, you're quite welcome. Anytime.
All right.